Thank you. Thank you, everyone, just joining us today. My name is Belinda. I'm the Artist Programs Coordinator for STEPS Public Art, and I'll be hosting today's talk. Some general housekeeping for today's talk. We do have ASL interpretation provided by Jordan, who is spotlighted. Please feel free to pin them as well if you need easy access. You also may use closed captioning for subtitles if you need that. So please see the CC icon for that at any time. And please keep your mic muted throughout the talk. And yeah, welcome to the keynote address for the CreateSpace Public Art Forum. We are thrilled to announce that the 2023 CreateSpace Public Art Forum has brought together over 50 participants from across Canada. This forum fosters connections and provides emerging equity-seeking artists with the skills, relationships, and supports needed to develop their public art practices. We also invite you to explore the upcoming 2023 CreateSpace Public Art Residency, Call to Artists, a national public art program designed in collaboration with advisors from coast to coast, and provides emerging Black, Indigenous, and racialized artists with the skills, relationships, and practical experiences needed to build and advance their public art practices. We will be dropping the link to the call in the chat. And before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge, do a land acknowledgement. So before we open up the conversation for tonight's or today's keynote address about art in the public realm and how we implement community arts in spaces that are changing in various ways, STEPS wishes to acknowledge the sacred land out of which we operate. It has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. The territories include the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. The territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes, taking only what is needed and ensuring the dish is never left empty for others. Today, the meeting place of Take Toronto is the home to a large, active, and diverse urban Indigenous community from many nations across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to use this land to share ideas and generate creativity. As a public arts organization, we recognize our privilege in working on stolen and unceded lands, and are working to unlearn colonial structure to move towards reconciliation. In the chat, you will see that we have shared a link to nativeland.ca. And this is a great starting point to help learn about the traditional Indigenous territories we currently reside in, as well as treaties, communities, and languages. We encourage everyone to learn about the lands that we call home and about the Indigenous communities we share this land with today. Now, without further ado, I will be introducing Shawna and Lorri for today's keynote, and also be some time for questions towards the end. So please feel free to hold on to your questions until the end. And also feel free to pop them into the chat. Shawna Dempsey and Lorri Millan were catapulted into the international spotlight with the performance and film We're Talking Vulva. Since then, their live work and videos have been exhibited in venues as far-ranging as women's centers in Sri Lanka, the Istanbul Biennale, Sydney Gay Lesbian Mardi Gras, and so forth. Over the years, their work has moved from stages to real-world venues and includes replacing the mirrors in a high school's girls' washroom with funhouse mirrors, installing a carnival on Bay Street, the heart of Canada's financial district, and ranging from dawn to dusk as well, and well beyond as uniformed rangers with lesbian national parks and services. They are currently part of the team that is designing the national 2S LGBTQ2+ national monument, which will be unveiled in Ottawa 2025. Thank you so much, Lorri and Shawna, for joining us today. I am so looking forward to this talk, and I'll pass it off on to you.
Thanks a lot, Belinda. I'm Shawna, and this is Lorri. We're joining you from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm just going to share our screen so that we can show you some work. Please feel free to ask us anything that comes up for you today. Now, we work in a whole wide range of media, primarily performance art, but also video, film, sculpture, installation, artist books, and public art. We don't have time to show all of the work we've made, but we're going to show a range of things we've created, and we're going to talk about our process with a focus on public engagement.
While we introduce our work, we're going to scroll through, as you can see, a bunch of images of our work. You'll notice that a central visual metaphor for us is the costume. Although we often have a lot of talking in our work, what people tend to remember is the image, the visual image, the strong visual metaphor can communicate more effectively than words.
People are more moved by an artwork than, say, an essay, an article, a news broadcast. Artist images are powerful, which is why artists have always been key in revolutionary times. By creating something out of nothing, which is what artists bravely do every single day, we illustrate new ways of being and doing. Artists participate in the transformation of culture.
We have worked together, collaborating for 34 years. About 1989 is when we began. We're originally from Toronto, but Winnipeg is our home and has been for decades now. When we talk about our work, we don't really define the roles that we do. We call ourselves collaborators. We're not really interested in the hierarchies that are associated with the work we do, like in theater, we have a director, et cetera, producer, actor. And when we talk about sharing the ownership of our work, we don't say we share it 50-50. We talk about each of us individually owning it 100%. When we make art, the process usually begins with a visual image. It's resonant, often dreamlike, and in its dreamlike quality, somewhat irrational, but compelling. Something we're interested in enough to actually make, to build, to somehow create. Next, we tend to decide anyway, which medium it's in. Should it be a performance, a video, a piece of public art? This is a really important step. It helps us choose a form that will best suit the idea we're working with. Then we'll decide on, during the course of creating the work, we will decide where this piece should live, meaning in the beginning, we usually did a great deal of our work were performances on stage with people in seats in a theater or gallery, but we branched into the streets, eventually into shopping malls, elevators, high schools, etc. We wanted to be where the people were, but most importantly, the locations that best served the ideas and concepts we're working with. Sometimes this process of creation will take years. Like a dream, it reveals itself in its meaning in stages over time. Often we don't actually fully understand a piece till we've performed it live, and even then, over many performances, sometimes we revise and revise.
In 1997, we created a work that we realized would need to exist out in the real world. It was a shift from work in front of audiences in fixed seats. We created Lesbian National Parks and Services, and we roamed Banff National Park for a month to insert a queer perspective into conservation, recreation, and the idea of normal, the scientific idea of normalcy. Nature has always been held up as a model of heterosexual normalcy. But in fact, nature is anything but heterosexual. Nature is decidedly queer. When Lorri and I were in uniform, we were never ever seen or when we were doing a tour of duty, we were never ever seen out of uniform. So we totally embodied the role of Rangers 24/7. Because we were wearing what looked like Parks uniforms, people assumed we were authority figures. And
Well, we were.
we really
were authority figures, but anyway.
authorities in the homosexual wilds. It created an opening for us to talk to them. And then as they were asking us, you know, where was the good fishing, we could see them reading the word lesbian on our hats and uniforms. For every location where we ranged, and we did this performance for 15 years all over the world, we would create a brochure. And the brochures always contained a map that had information about where we were ranging, as well as a few extra sites. So for example, people would ask for directions to their hotel, and we would say, it's right here on the map, next to the Invisible Homosexual Mountain History Museum. As I was saying, we ranged from coast to coast in Canada and on 4 continents as the Rangers, starting well before queer people had full human rights in this country.
I'm Shawna Dempsey.
And I'm Lorri Millan. We're Lesbian Rangers.
Children look up to us with awe and respect. Confused tourists ask us for directions.
And we give them maps.
It's been very rewarding. For another couple of weeks, as Lorri mentioned, we're going to have a recruitment day to try to do outreach to expand the core of Lesbian Rangers. We think that not only do we need more full-time Rangers for the core, but it's important that people take the Ranger ethic back to their own communities, try to make their own communities a safer, happier, more friendly space for lesbians.
People go away questioning, at the very least, go away questioning the models they've grown up with, the ideas about nature and their own culture, and wonder, where are the lesbians?
Specifically in terms of recreation, recreation has been so framed by heterosexism. We think it's important to insert ourselves into that as well.
The assumption of heterosexuality really does mask everything we do. It's about time that we're seen as a normal part of an ecosystem rather than an exceptional part.
Or a deviant part, or an aberrant part.
see in our culture that fear is contagious. We have a whole community that's in the closet as a result, that is not living its life to the fullest. And I think that we proceed in most of our work with the idea that courage is also contagious. And that by being a very visible presence here in the park, in a place where people are sort of, they come expecting a certain kind of experience to this place. It's a place where they come to shop and maybe see a little nature and then do some more shopping. But it's about a certain sort of heterosexual and commerce-oriented activity. I think they're caught off guard. We look like something that fits. We make them laugh. Hopefully, the strategy is also to, by engaging people's sense of humor and humanity, that they'll sort of open up a bit and maybe think about something they hadn't thought about before. And as far as other lesbians goes, or any kind of devia, perhaps an example, a very visible example of us, of our lifestyle, of
Walking around with a big lesbian sign on our heads.
perhaps they'll go home and be braver. Perhaps they'll be braver here while they're trying to have fun like everyone else. Maybe they'll hold hands walking down the street.
The Lesbian Rangers, uh-oh, not again. Phew. Okay, there we are with our sister service, the Mounties. The Rangers really opened us up to the potential of creating work in public, non-art sanctioned spaces. So we realized there were different ways of interacting with audiences. We also began using consumerism as an interface. For example, we did a piece called Scent Bar that looked like a pop-up perfumery. Can't say that word, perfumery. We installed ourselves in malls or restaurants and empty storefronts, and under the pretext of creating a custom fragrance, interviewed people about their deepest hopes and fears, particularly with respect to the environment. For another piece, we even opened our own store. Grocery store was created in response to the lack of healthy food available in downtown Winnipeg. For 3 weeks, we sold food to draw attention to questions around what makes a livable city. Advertising flyers were delivered to all of the homes in the area, and we ended up selling thousands of dollars of produce and other fresh foods to folks who were hungry. We did this at wholesale prices, mind you. While we were there, they would often chat with each other and have contact that they might not have had otherwise with each other, and ask questions like, why don't we have a grocery store? And wouldn't it be great to have a laundromat? And what does our city really need?
Attention shoppers, tired of trudging to the suburbs?
Shop Grocery Store, an innovative concept in convenience.
The things you need, where you need them. Downtown.
Grocery Store.
Good food, friendly service, and a vision for a livable city.
Grocery Store.
Food and art, together at last.
Art does indeed provide. Courtesy and convenience at Grocery Store.
Downtown Winnipeg has suffered from decades of civic neglect and developers' abuse. Where once our needs were met locally, city dwellers are now forced to trudge miles for groceries and laundromats. Studies have stated what we all know: an alive, exciting city needs housing, businesses, culture, and services to thrive. New developments such as sports complexes, wine bars, and discotheques do not even begin to address issues of revitalization. With a cry of art will provide, the Co-op Collective steps proudly into the breach with Grocery Store, a performative installation dedicated to meeting your basic needs. Stop by for affordable snacks, staples, and sundries. Grocery Store is located in the heart of the Exchange. Good food, friendly service, and a vision for a livable downtown.
Another piece in which we inserted ourselves into the public realm was called Lift. It happens in an elevator, a very intimate space with specific codes of behavior, like you're supposed to look forward, not talk. In this everyday space, I, as an anonymously dressed businesswoman, tell a continually looping story over the course of an entire workday. Lorri, dressed as an old-fashioned elevator operator, provides a sense of safety and signals that this trip is going to be slightly different. People heard part of the story as they went to work, part of the story when they went for coffee, part of the story when they came back, then went to lunch, or they shared the snippets that they had heard with their colleagues over the water cooler. The audience were office workers, like the woman telling the story. A fairy tale about a modern woman who could somehow never feel quite at ease, and she never got what she thought the world was promising her.
Go ahead.
A woman stabs her heel in the sewer grate. Damn, she thinks to herself, those shoes are expensive. She turns and bends over to pick up the missing piece, thinking maybe it could be reattached. But she can't dislodge it from between the slats. She struggles, and as she does, she happens to glance down into a pair of eyes looking up at her.
Going down.
When he was a child, the woman fell into a diffused well on her grandparents' farm. It really wasn't very deep. She didn't fall very far, and she didn't hurt herself. Landed in the bottom in a pile of old rubbish, leaves, a couple of inches of water. Still, even though she could hear her family calling her name, she couldn't answer. Now, years later, she avoids crowded spaces. She walks to work in the morning, and she takes the stairs to the 18th floor. Her thigh master routine, she jokes. It's cheaper than gym membership. At the office, she presides over a football field, telephone callers. Their cubicles extend almost to the mannequin. Everything is time. Every thought, every word. There are standards to adhere to, and there's targets to meet. She's a supervisor. She's both the timer and the timed. 2 clocks run inside of her. One making time, one losing time, until the stroke of 5 when she can begin her descent, her exercise regime, once again. A woman comes home from work carrying 2 bags of groceries. She unlocks the door, goes in, puts the bags down, and opens the fridge. That's when she notices the condiments are all wrong. Everything else is exactly as it should be, but she's gazing deep into the refrigerator of somebody else's life. Another woman has bought more expensive mayonnaise and, inexplicably, fish sauce. What do you do with fish sauce? And there's no ancient horseradish, no unopened mint jelly, no half jar of maraschino cherries left over from New Year's. The woman understands immediately she's been the victim of identity theft. To the untrained eye, nothing's changed, but she knows everything has changed.
Lorri. First one.
At the time she fell in the well on her grandparents' farm, she ended up somewhere totally different. She landed someplace totally outside of everything she'd ever known. So there was nothing that she could do but sit and wait for them to find her and bring her back. When she remembers the experience, it's with the faint mix of wonder and dread.
First look. Oh, I want to stay.
Welcome to. I want to hear the story. Let's start the top one. We'll go to 18. When she remembers the experience, it's with the same mix of dread and awe she got the first time she went to the planetarium in grade school. Or like when she read that article in National Geographic about time that said that humans invented time. And if we didn't measure it, it might not even exist. That's kind of scary and amazing. The woman falls and falls and falls. And as she does, she thinks about all the places she's ever been and all the people she's ever loved. She thinks about her favorite foods and the sky over her grandparents' farm, how big it is. It really isn't that uncomfortable for them. She's kind of gotten used to it. Maybe I fell a long time ago, she thinks to herself. Maybe I've been falling my whole life and I just haven't noticed before. A woman breaks her heel in a sewer grate. Damn, she thinks to herself, these shoes were expensive. She turns and bends over to pick up the missing piece, thinking.
One of the ways we've been able to survive as artists is by doing lots of different things, diversifying, if you will. It's worked for us because we're interested in making many different kinds of work in different forms. Through doing what we call real world performances, we realized that we could provide ordinary people, people on the street, a space to communicate something of themselves and to play. And then we wondered, what happens if we remove us? Can we set stages for others to have an experience?
The first piece where we removed our bodies entirely was the intervention into Central Tech High School in Toronto. There were these gargantuan mirrors in every girl's washroom. And Lorri and I built funhouse mirrors, curved, distorting mirrors that we installed on top of them. It was a way to express all the weird messages that girls get about their appearance. And for 4 months, girls used our mirrors, the funhouse mirrors, to fix their hair. But we also saw them making faces and playing. The reflected image became a source of fun instead of anxiety.
We were invited to make a piece for Nuit Blanche in Toronto. It was during the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, and we wanted to close down Bay Street, the center of Canada's financial district, and shockingly, the city let us. We created a midway fair, like you see in a fair, and we called the Midway Wild Ride. We parked real carnival rides in front of the nation's major banking institutions. Participants could experience sliding down the fun slide and feel their stomachs drop on the avalanche. And unlike the systems of capitalism around us, it was all free. The air was scented with mini donuts and free candy floss as the carnies, dressed like downsized Bay Street bankers, enticed passersby to come along for the ride. The pumping classic rock music, all tunes with a theme of money and decline, bounced off the skyscrapers all night long. As the carnival barker also growled those questions like you hear when you're on rides, except they went like this: how low can you go? And do you want to go lower? 250,000 people saw this installation over 12 hours, way more people than we could reach by an ordinary performance. And they could participate. They helped to embody the ideas we were trying to communicate. In creating this work, we had to take into account the type of event Nuit Blanche is. It's a super busy arts fair with lots of arts events going on all over the city and thousands of viewers and participants. It's a huge party. We needed to match that energy. We needed to make something that could be easily read by passersby and didn't get lost in the chaos of the event.
So obviously we've got a pretty strong point of view. We've always wanted to change the world through our art for the better. We care not only about creating the artwork, but getting it to an audience, even an audience who might not want to see it. In 1996, we made a series of bus shelter ads advertising Winnipeg as a queer utopia. At the time, the city's slogan was "One Great City," but it wasn't so great for us. There had been fatal gay bashings, and the mayor refused to declare Pride an official day or to fly the rainbow flag. So we created an ad campaign about Winnipeg for Winnipeggers, Winnipeg, one gay city, to create the reality that we wanted. The problem was the company that owned the bus shelters refused to put the ads up. This resulted in us going to the Human Rights Tribunal, which was a many years long process, and we were successful. We won. But by then, times had changed. Winnipeg had just elected America's first gay mayor, and we didn't want people to think that this project was about him, and we didn't want it to have negative consequences against him. Instead, we've reformatted the images as postcards to spread the gayness of Winnipeg through the mail internationally. Fast forward 25 years, and a local gallery finally installed the bus shelter ads as we intended around the city of Winnipeg, part of a larger show called One Queer City with young queer artists. Things had evolved.
In all of our work, we are detail driven. Wild Ride worked because it had the sound, taste, and feel of a real midway. The Rangers worked because they had all the gear to do their job. Name tags, matching boots and watches and pamphlets and guides, etc., just like real Rangers. One Gay City worked because it looked like a real civic ad campaign. I think part of our success is also being mindful of context. The Rangers ranged and parked. One Gay City needed bus shelters. Wild Ride was an all-night arts event / party during a financial crisis. Other work needed a stage with lights and sound and seats for an audience.
In 2020, a couple of architect friends approached us and asked if we would be interested in working with them in submitting an application to design the national 2S LGBTQI+ national monument in Ottawa. Now, permanent public art isn't something we had ever made, never mind an actual national monument. But we do care a lot about the importance of documenting the injustices that queer people in Canada have faced. The project was full of potential to reach a whole other kind of audience, a huge audience, but it was also really personal. The subject reflected our experience and the experiences of people we've known and respected and loved. People here and people who are no longer with us. Creating a space of honor and celebration for our community seemed like something we wanted to be part of. But what would it look like? As queers, we don't have a single unifying symbol. Lorri started drawing the feeling we had as we marched, as we protested, as we danced. Those feelings we had when we faced down violence, faced down the police, or came together as a community to demand change. She drew that growing energy like an expanding thunderhead. The elder that we're working with on the project, Albert McLeod, told us that thunderclouds are where the thunderers live, or thunderbirds live, divine spirits that set things right through rain and wind. The architects, Liz and Peter, started playing with the cloud form. How do we create a cloud? It's just vapor. It doesn't really exist. It's not solid. They realized what we needed to make is the imprint of a cloud, a rising cloud inside a cylinder rather than the cloud itself. These are the ideas that led us to make the submission to the competition. And as it turns out, it was the winning submission out of 35 international entries. Queer energy rising up, clad in mirror tiles like exploding disco balls, reflecting all of our identities.
We're the only all-Canadian team. We're a primarily queer team. We are the purge generation.
We've been purged from Canadian history.
Our friends, our lovers were hounded out of the military. We're subjected to violence in the streets of this country. We have a huge responsibility to honor all of those lives. We need to create a monument to embody the creativity, passion of our communities.
We were talking about how a thunderhead brings a sense of awe, and it brings a sense of fear, and it can be destructive, but it can also provide growth, and it can provide new life. It's as if we tried to contain the cloud that disappeared. It just left an imprint of itself within the monument, and the void becomes the monument. As you enter the site, you're confronted by a curving wall that provides the history of the purge.
There's two stages within this monument. One faces inwards. It's perfect for vigils, small gatherings, individual contemplative moments. The other thrusts outward from the base of the monument itself. You can have larger performances, bands, protests. There's a fire pit around which people can gather as points of remembrance and healing.
It needs to be a place for people to be seen and heard and given a voice. It can be a place for big performances or really intimate moments.
There's always hope, no matter what we're confronted with. And this is a physical demonstration of that for our nation.
This project is not something we ever imagined doing. And maybe this is true of all of our work, actually, but it is the result of making work driven by ideas and the desire to communicate and passion to change the world. And if that lines up with opportunities, well, apply, give it a whirl. Grants, commissions, residencies, shows, public art competitions. Your applications will not always succeed, but it all contributes to your practice as a professional artist, whether it's meeting new potential collaborators, creating new directions and growth in your work, or even just gaining better understanding of the competition process. It all contributes to your breadth and knowledge as an artist. It all matters, and it's all part of building culture.
Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you both so much. That was incredible. I think I speak for everyone when I say that was such a fun talk as well. I saw lots of comments saying like, this is so fun, this is so great. So I'm really looking forward to all the questions that the Public Art Forum participants have for you both. And yeah, I will just open up the floor for anybody who wants to ask a question or pop one into the chat, and I can read it aloud as well. But yeah, thank you so much for an incredible talk. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Very inspiring.
We should say we're happy to answer questions about anything at all.
Okay.
So.
Like money, queerness in Winnipeg, surviving as an artist for, I mean, for us, it's almost 4 decades, anything at all. Yeah.
Thank you. While we wait for some questions to roll in, maybe I can see if there are any comments that I can read out. Saw photos of the results. This monument is so beautiful on your website. So cool to see a project pivot like that so you can still achieve what you wanted, but still be sensitive to changes in times. There's a question on how do your finances work? Or how do you finance your work? Sorry, I completely misread that.
Yeah, usually it's a real combo of things. We apply for grants and never think you shouldn't apply for grant. Never think, oh, I got a grant last year, I shouldn't apply again this year, or I'm not ready to apply for a grant. Apply. Especially right now, Canada Council has a lot of money, so your chances are good at Canada Council, higher than at the provincial or municipal level. So grants is one way. We've also made things throughout our careers, like we've made videos, we've made postcards, we've made books, and selling those things or renting those things brings in some revenue.
A little bit, not a lot, but it's,
little bit,
you know, it's
yeah.
every year those checks are welcome.
We give talks like this one, we teach workshops, we're guest artists at universities and high schools. So that's another way we make money and, you know, ways to feed ourselves and feed our practice. And sometimes we get commissions, which is great. Sometimes a curator will say, we really want you to create something for this event, and this is our budget. And then we work within that.
And there's been times when we've toured a lot, like 6-7 months of the year. So in other words, doing, you know, I don't know, what was it, like 30-40 performances a
30,
year?
30.
I mean, you could argue that in the end, it all comes from the same place. It all comes from public funding for the arts. But we hustled, and we've hustled more or less at every level and in every way we could imagine, depending on what stage in our lives we were at. We don't tour as much now for a whole bunch of reasons. But there are opportunities out there, and if you have ideas, apply. Just don't be shy about it. We can't overemphasize that. We talk to so many, especially younger, less experienced artists who are reticent, and as if nothing else, you learn how to put together great applications, and eventually you will get a grant.
We've performed at a couple of fringe festivals. We've opened for bands and clubs.
Really unlikely places.
We played a comedy club. We did 2 church conferences. Like
there was a point at which we had to discuss the idea of saying no to something because they were such off the wall places. We said yes to perform that we wondered about the, I don't know, the cost to us to do it. But anyway, we just spent a lot of time putting our work in front of all kinds of people.
But something like this is sobering, something to remember: the most money we've ever made in a year from our art, after all of our expenses, is $18,000 each.
And I mean, you know, I'm not being, without sounding egotistical, we do about as well as you can do in the arts in Canada. Except for maybe taking a job teaching at, you know, a university or something, but just from our artwork. That's.
Yeah, I guess it rolls into another question from someone: if you're both full-time artists.
Not anymore. We were for 12 years. And we also curate as well. So we did freelance curation too. But then we kind of, you know, our lives have taken so many unexpected turns. Then we started working as co-directors with a third person of an artist-run center in Winnipeg called MAWA, Mentoring Artists for Women's Art. And we kind of looked at that as a project, like we could make a bunch of things happen there for 3 years. And as it has turned out, I have stayed there because I really enjoyed making things happen for gender marginalized artists.
Well, and it's not, you don't there full time. There's a great team of people there, so you can work. We still work about half time in the studio. I mean, it also coincides with different points in your life. I mean, I can't overstate how long and hard we worked for years where we just weren't ever home and whatnot. But I had a kid. We got tired. We were tired. So we needed to reduce. There's things you can do, right? You can decide to be out there and you have to work a lot to support being on the road in our case. But you can also decide to reduce your performance load or your studio output and just focus on less but different work, you know. And for us, that's worked out really well. I mean, maybe when you're young also you have a lot, like it's like the explosion of the first couple of albums, right? And then it's a more of a measured practice, I think we have going on now, and more diverse.
I also wanted to read this comment by Julia, where they just mentioned that they learned about you two in school, and so they're feeling a little bit starstruck, and I think somebody seconded that. So I also want to leave room for anybody to just like leave any commentary like that or any thoughts that they want to share. I think is really lovely. Another question from Hayden: what have you found has been the biggest shift you've seen in the art world as queer artists? What would you say is the biggest piece of advice you would give to queer artists just starting out in the art world? There's a couple more, but let's start with that.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest shift has been society-wide and how queer people are seen and treated and what rights we have. Like that has changed. When we were born, it was against the law, right? Like you could be jailed.
When we were doing artist talks 30 years ago, just to pick a number, 25 years ago, we would probably spend, especially if we were at a university talking to a class, we would probably spend 50% of the time talking about being lesbians. They had more questions, in fact, about being lesbians and feminists necessarily than the art we were doing, because for some of them, we were the first out people to stand in front of them and talk openly about being us. And it sounds like that would have been irritating, but for us it was just part of the gig. And then in the 90s, especially the early 90s, it was really just part of it. It was if you were going to put yourself out there, you were going to have to either be open to these questions or manage it somehow. So that's a huge shift. Nobody ever asks us about that now.
Yeah, we're old news now. It's queer people.
Almost nobody, because really young people still, I mean, there's lots of people that still, queer people out there not in large city centers, or they're living in, with maybe families that are not very receptive. I mean, it still happens that people want to talk about the fact that you can live a really full and great life as a queer person, but that's a huge shift. I mean, it's just not really part of the discourse anymore.
So the art world, I guess when we started out, we were maybe a little bit special as queer people. Now we're not so special as queer people. That's okay. We're happy with that. The art world has, I think, changed a lot too. Like some spaces have disappeared. It's always in flux, right? Like some artist run centers go by, new ones come up. They might only last a few years, but that's okay. And then they're replaced by something new. So the ecosystem is always changing for sure. I think economically it's harder now. I mean, there's more artists, which is great. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna add on to that, if you were special or it was a unique thing starting out, if that changes the opportunities that are afforded to you now with a different demographic.
For sure.
Yeah, but it's a little more complicated than us being queer or lesbian or feminists or anything, because the landscape for, let's talk about lesbian, queer expression, whatever, has changed. It used to be that our culture, that building queer culture was central to the fight for civil rights that we were engaged in. And we had film festivals and theater festivals, and there were all these cultural events that were for our community. And that's where we got the place outside the bar where we get together and we get to see cultural expression. And those are mainly gone. A byproduct or a victim perhaps of progress, that now our work tends to be embedded within other festivals, independent festivals and things like that now. And we don't have these dedicated spaces anymore. So on the upside, you're probably not going to be severely penalized for being queer if you apply to an independent film festival, say. On the downside, it was great. It was great to have these places that we could still get together and have these conversations. So that's something that's changed. Plus, the other thing is that as older artists now, that's plays a big part, and it's not a bad thing. Not only do we not apply for as many things as we used to, but emerging artists have honestly, it's an affordable act to bring in emerging artists for some centers, as opposed to more established artists. So there are some opportunities that are not open to us in the same way, because we need a little more money than an emerging artist might be receiving, especially, and there's two of us, and we both eat, so we both like to get a fee. So some of the things that we would participate in before are now spaces for other artists to be in, and not so much for us. We're still happy to be part of group things and included in all sorts of different venues, but in a positive way, it's also a factor of being in a different place in our careers, and other people should be filling the places that we might have occupied before.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I could have so many follow-ups, but let me get back to questions. Another question from Hayden is, how did you go about creating the team for building the National Monument?
I wish we could take credit, but
Well, the architects came to us because they really wanted artists to be part of the process.
it was part of the demands of the ask.
The
actually.
RPF.
The RPF, the terms were that there would be architects and artists.
And at first we said, no,
What do we know about architecture or national monuments? But it didn't take a lot. I mean, it became clear that this is something that was totally within our wheelhouse, that it was something that we know how to make spaces, and we really liked the architects that approached us.
Yeah.
We just connected immediately, and it was great. And then the next step was to bring in any other collaborators that we wanted on the team.
Yeah, and we said we didn't want to do it if Albert didn't want to do it. And we've known Albert for probably 30 years working in AIDS education here in Winnipeg primarily, or that's how we got to know Albert. So when he said yes, then it was like, okay, we're good to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And what was the process like for creating an art book?
An art book.
Often we start with the images first. So I think we showed a picture of the Life magazine we created, but ours is Day in the Life of a Bull Dyke. And we shot all the images first.
Because what it started with was the same as all our other work, that we in the 60s, all through the lifespan of Life magazine, they're famous for these what do you call them, photojournalistic essays that were big spreads, large, usually black and white and color photos, famously following junkies around Needle Park, or famous Vietnam War photojournalistic essays. And they were very powerful from our youth. These are things that we would look at. They would come into our homes and see them. And so we had the power of those stories being told in this print form with very striking photos was what we were aiming for. That was our inspiration. And then we went about the process of doing that. We created a photographic story following a bull dyke around Winnipeg.
With the same kind of sensational language that Life magazine had,
Yes.
kind of afraid.
Look at these strange creatures. Look what they do. We feel pity and yet are curiously
strangely compelled.
We can't look away. So that was the sort of thing we started on, and it did actually lead to us making a Super 8 film at the same time too, which also had that totally different side of the same story.
But we started with the images. We shot the images first, and then we did the writing after. That's just our way of doing things.
Yeah. I mean, it's really different for like we also made a book for the Rangers, two books, in fact, a junior lesbian handbook, which is pocket sized and has all the information you need to
tie up lesbians,
do knots and start fires and how to put them out, and our song and our motto and everything you might need to become a full-fledged junior lesbian ranger, and then a field guide, because you need to have a field guide to go into the bush, which is fully illustrated, and you can use it in the bush quite handily. It's a good thing to have by your side. So these were things that made sense within the world that we created for the Rangers. The Rangers needed these tools, and so we made them. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, because we have some other publications, but they kind of sort of happen the same way.
I mean, we've either self-published, so we've hired designers and paid for all the printing, and it's hard to get funding to do that. So we did a tour in Japan to pay for the printing of the Life magazine. Or we've worked with publishers, and then they look after all of that, which is awesome.
Small publishers, but they're interested in art publications, working with artists, not just necessarily doing commercial novels or whatever, with some little more offbeat projects. So we've had great luck though with that. I mean, there are people there's lots of great people to work with, and we've had great experiences.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that definitely answers your question about just the general process. From the same person who asked the previous 3 questions, they also just wanted to add a huge thank you for your work that you've done to pave the way for queer people and doing the work and educating others to help work towards a more queer positive collective culture. Major respect and gratitude. Thank you from Nutmeg, and also a question about your performance art being so fun and thought-provoking. The monument you're creating is incredible. I'm curious how you would receive graffiti on the monument. Would that feel disrespectful, welcomed?
Yeah, that's actually going to be hard, and we're expecting it. The National Capital Commission is responsible for removing all graffiti within 24 hours. Which is great.
And there's part of the process that we're engaged in now is, and the architects more than us, because we're not technically savvy about these things, there's coatings and there's materials and coatings on materials that can make that much easier. I guess it's quite common, like we're situated, our monument is situated, it's just a stone's throw from the Holocaust monument. And they have a lot of, I mean, like all the national monuments do get graffitied, and I can't imagine we won't be targeted as well. But it's kind of just comes with the ask, you know. We just have to do what we can to. So much of the site is not made like there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of pathways, and hopefully there's. It won't feel as much of a target in a strange way. Not to contrast it in any, judgmental way with the Holocaust Museum, but there's lots and lots of walls, or monument rather. There's lots and lots and lots of walls and places to target for this sort of stuff. We don't have as much of that. So might work a little bit in our favor that we have less targetable surfaces, but who am I kidding? Who am I kidding?
Yeah, it's really hard to say, like I think of the Freedom Convoy that was in Ottawa, and maybe they would be like, queer people, we don't care about queer people, fuck Trudeau, or maybe they would have destroyed it if it was there. I don't know. I don't know where things are at right now.
It's a very curious time we're in. I don't know. So, but it is on our minds. We're going to do our best to make it a durable site, and not just a durable in terms of what we build, but in terms of its use as a site. We want the site to be alive with people using it. We want people to be having picnics. We want people to have little commemorative performances of some sort or another.
Protest
rallies. We could play soccer on the pitch. We want it to be used by people every day, because that's what we fought for.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I agree with that. Shivani has a question on what is your process for researching the artistic concept that you want to work with?
We do a ton of research. Usually the first thing we do, like when we think of an idea, like the elevator piece lift started with the idea of Lorri's uniform. Like we loved that image, and that's like, where did that image come from?
Anybody funds us for anything. They say, oh yeah, we want to wear this. Anyway.
But one of the first things we always do is we go to the public library, to the children's section, and we take out all the books on that subject.
Oh,
and
wow.
Learn so many things about elevators and the history of skyscrapers.
That may drive us into the adult section. Don't get us wrong, but it is a really great entry point into a subject. We do tons of reading. We'll maybe see movies and stuff too. And it's not it takes a while. Like, I mean, first of all, there's 2 of us. And that part of our process is this really long conversation that we've had now for so many years. So, we'll be sitting and we'll be reading and we'll be talking and bothering each other and saying, did you see this? And we'll end up down some rabbit hole. It's really not very different, I think, from how most artists conceive work. The difference is we have this conversation that makes us the first audience for each other's ideas. And part of this time that we've invested in it means, well, for us, like very few collaborative teams only work together, and that's what we do. And very few of them last over this long period of time. And that's neither here nor there, because lots of people have their independent practices and then they come together and go apart and whatnot. We're hopelessly codependent. And part of the reason why we continue to be successfully codependent is that we kind of, I mean, we don't have, I was going to say we leave our egos at the door, but that ego in the sense that we don't waste a lot of time being hurt by like I'll say to Shawna, that's just a dumb idea, Shawna, and we'll just move on. Like it's not personal.
Or I'll fight for it.
Or she'll fight for it and go away, and maybe we'll come and the same thing for both of us, you know, like we've gone past that stage that most collaborations I don't think get past very much. I could be wrong, but you know, it's a hard place to get past where your feelings are more involved than anything else. So maybe it helps on that front that we do so many different things, because sometimes it's like, oh, well, that's a good idea, but it's not this idea. And it gets set aside and ends up being a book or something later on, right? We have room, we have outlets for all sorts of ideas.
I love
They're
that.
not all great
No,
either.
God, no.
Like you know, we've made some work that's like, we didn't show it to you.
I think starting in the children's section is so cool.
I highly recommend it.
Okay. Maha has a question on, when creating an installation on Indigenous land, how do we go about respectfully researching Indigenous perspectives to include in the installation?
Well, that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because we're not Indigenous.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that, except to say that we need to respect where we are, but I also cannot, I'm not going to take another people's story. Like I can, but we also do tend to look for universal problematic word, but we do look for ways in which lots of people can engage with our work. That's an unsatisfactory answer, I know.
I honestly think that's the best way to answer it, like from your perspective, I think maybe is what they were looking for, but also, you know, highlighting.
Because we don't tend to do permanent work, that helps. This monument that we're making, that we are bringing people into the process so that they can tell us and they can be participants in this collaboration. So maybe there's the distinction in some way in the actual work itself.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially like, just inviting people in, and the community engagement aspect, I think, is a huge theme throughout your work in general, like even with like the grocery store. Like I thought that was a really cool concept of kind of like really activating a space, but thinking about the community in which like you're activating the space within. I don't know. Maha had another question on, can we reach out to the smaller art publishers with proposals? Do you have names that we could check out?
You know, we worked with Peddler Press, but they've gone under now. We've worked with Arbiter Ring Press. They're based in Winnipeg. There are tiny little presses everywhere.
Yeah.
I would say build relationships as a starting point, as opposed to a cold call or sending out proposals cold. Maybe, I know it's old fashioned, maybe a phone call even.
Well, they published us, they didn't pay us to write the work. Like we made the work under the auspices of a grant or another project. So we created the work and then had something to present, and more of a package than just text, because we had distinct needs for the actual physical book itself. But that's the other thing. I mean, the small presses are not in a position to, give advances, for instance, to write something. So I would suggest that you go through the grant system or commission or something like that to create work. And then you can have more fruitful conversations with small publishers, for sure.
Or maybe big,
Or maybe
depending on
big, yeah.
what you're creating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I saw another question. What advice would you give to folks wanting to transition into public art? It's a good general question.
I think it depends on what kind of public art it is. This project we're doing in Ottawa, we could not do it without architects. Because there's pipes under the land and there's
we're building something that it's not, we're not qualified. And it was part of the demand of the competition, is that you had to put together a team of qualified people, and every public art competition has its requirements, and usually something like that, like you also have to show the ability to make something, right? Public art is an interesting world. It's, as we know, there's a lot of terrible public art out there, and it really depends on who's asking, like, what's the competition for? Who's going to be deciding what's built?
Like, is it a developer of a condo building?
Yeah, like who's sitting on that jury? So that's something to think about. And but honestly, I would suggest that if you've got some good ideas, I can't give you better advice than just to give it a whirl and
go for it.
We were really careful when we were applying. We read very carefully. So this monument was the result of a lawsuit brought against the federal government by survivors of the purge. And
that is people who were fired for being queer from the RCMP, the Canadian military, and the civil service between the 50s and the 90s.
Not just fired, harassed, persecuted, even tortured in some cases. There's a great film about this subject called a documentary called Fruit Machine. And I think TVO, I think it's available to view on TVO, among other places. I highly recommend it just because it's, it's quite eye-opening, or especially if you don't know much about that history. But we read through it very carefully, because there was the purge, and there a lot of other stakeholders put together a lot of information about what they wanted and what they wanted to see in an application and in a final monument. And we were really, I know that some of the applications pretty much ignored it. They just went ahead and put in what they wanted. But for us, and maybe we can't speak about other competitions as specifically, but for us, I know that because we took this into serious consideration, it helped our project in the end. So the site, the ask, what is the competition asking of you, and your own skills, and putting together a team that will support you, or at least show that you know how to access support to make something. I think those make probably for a more successful application. But this jury that made up this competition was they were architects and artists and people who were able to judge this from we want a great piece of public art perspective, as opposed to, we want something to fill this space in this development, and we don't want to offend anybody. And so there's all kinds of so look at the competition and try and know what you're getting yourself into. That'd be the other thing I'd say.
Well, and the other thing I would say is really be open to what public art could be. Like we've done all sorts of public art, but they're not cast bronze statues in the city square, So really follow where your creativity is leading you. And maybe they're asking for a hunk of bronze in the city square, but if you say, no, I want to have a dance performance with 50 timpani players and a dragon dancer, they might say, yeah, that sounds awesome. That's what we want to.
Or you might be able to subvert that piece of bronze in some way also, if that's your intention. There's lots of approaches, and it probably just takes your creativity and your time to try and give it a whirl, which I don't like to dismiss as not being worth a lot as artists, but that's what we have to give, right? That's what we have our ideas, and then we look for opportunities to express them and go for it. But it can be a frustrating arena, I think. At least if you look around, some places do have great art in the public venues, but so much of it's bad. Just terrible. So it's I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's great. Another question from Paris. How do you find alternative locations to have art exhibitions outside of galleries and artist-run centers? For example, how do you navigate finding permission to use public spaces?
Yeah, that's complex.
Yeah.
Often we don't ask, we just do, that's the easiest way to do it. Sometimes we get turfed.
Like out of malls, we usually get turfed out of malls as rangers, for instance,
And
because they're
we-
private property.
And we also got turfed from a park because they said we were impersonating rangers and
Yeah.
that wasn't allowed.
Yeah, but we were there for a while before that happened. It was all very Canadian in that
Yeah.
there was a lot of, it was very a soft expel, but plus also the rangers are not a provocative. We're not there to provoke.
unarmed.
We're unarmed and, well, we'll pamphlet you. Anyway,
But for example, an elevator, so hard to get permission to use an elevator. We couldn't believe how hard it was to get permission. to
it was
use an
not
elevator.
long after 9/11, and so people were very worried about something strange happening in their elevators.
Yeah.
Go figure. But in the end, it was through working with like other people who knew people who said, well, I think I can talk to this building and I'm pretty sure the owners of this building would be into an art project. Like that's kind of a networking thing.
We've
Yeah.
also done a couple of projects in an actual grocery store. And there's a grocery store chain here in Winnipeg, Food Fair, small chain owned by a Palestinian immigrant. Loves us, loves our work, lets us do whatever we need to do in his meat
Yeah.
locker or,
And that
which
was
is
to
awesome.
make the work more than as a
Yeah.
performance. We've also done same thing, like, especially if you're part of a festival, these kinds of producer relationships can mean, like when we were in, was it Regina or Saskatoon, where we did Sempar in a restaurant, and that was just through people knowing people and the manager, and there was a space that would work for that. And the next thing you know, we were there in the restaurant for several,
week,
many days, yeah. So we're kind of being part of the community and not being afraid to ask. And outside of the big centers, people are super helpful. Like one of the things we discovered coming here from Toronto was just like, you'd be standing at a bus stop and people would be, say, oh yeah, I'm an artist too. Oh, I'll help you find a studio space. And I don't know, I know somebody, like it just, we were in a situation where we needed a whole lot of extras to make a film and to help with the art department. And, on a Wednesday afternoon, we could get 40 people to turn up and help.
Wow.
I don't mean to say you should leave Toronto, but what I am saying is that sometimes you just have to kind of ask and network. And if you don't know somebody, somebody else will know somebody. And that's usually how it happens. And Shawna's comment that maybe not asking permission is a good way to go is also something to keep in your back pocket, depending on.
No, that's all lovely advice. I don't think there's any more questions unless someone wants to just raise their hand or speak or give any more thoughts. There's so many amazing comments. I wish I could send you like a transcript of all of them, but
we've been watching them come in. Thank you all very much. Thanks. I know we're going over time, so thanks for sticking with it. And sorry again about the technical.
No, it's all good. Thank you for this talk. I'm just reading some of the comments. I'm so in awe of the monumental work that you've done in intersecting art and advocacy. You guys are doing amazing work. Much respect. Thank you. Yeah, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for giving your time today and having this amazing conversation with us. I could go on and on forever, but I'll let everyone have their time back. But it's been lovely. Thank you so much, Lorri and Shawna, for this. I want to thank our ASL interpreter, Jordan, for the ASL translations today. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for Eva for the tech support on the back end and for Arden supporting as well. Thank you all so much for joining and for this lovely talk. As I said before, it is recorded and will be posted as well.
We'll be watching